Everyone wants control. Few understand how to get it. The powerful don't shout. They maneuver. They don't argue. They observe. Influence is not about being liked. It's about being necessary. In a world where most people play checkers, the manipulators play chess. They don't react. They design the reaction. If you want to win in this world, you must learn to see it not as it should be, but as it is. You must learn the rules behind the rules. This is not a game for the timid. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind. And tell us, where are you watching from? You think you can choose when to enter the game of power? Foolish. You've been in it since birth. Every interaction, every conversation, every silent moment when you think you're merely observing, these are all moves in an eternal dance of influence and control. The game doesn't wait for your acknowledgement. It doesn't require your consent. It simply unfolds with or without your conscious participation. Look around you. That colleague who always agrees with everyone, they're playing. That friend who seems to have no agenda, they're playing. Even the ones who claim to hate politics, who pride themselves on staying above the fray, they're playing too, just poorly. The difference between the successful and the frustrated isn't participation, it's awareness. The first rule of power is to understand this fundamental truth. There is no opting out. Every decision to not participate is itself a move that others will exploit. Every attempt to stay neutral is a position that others will manipulate to their advantage. You're either shaping the environment around you, or that environment is shaping you into what it needs you to be. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power operates the same way. The space you refuse to occupy will be filled by someone else's influence. Most people live in denial of this reality. They imagine they can simply focus on their work, their family, their small circle of influence. But power doesn't respect boundaries. It seeps into every crevice of human interaction. While you sleep, others move their pieces. While you rest, thinking you're safe in your little corner, the game continues without your consent or awareness. Your ignorance doesn't protect you. It only ensures you'll be a pawn rather than a player. This is not about paranoia. It's about clarity. The truly powerful don't waste energy fighting this reality. They embrace it. They study it. They learn to read the invisible currents that shape human behavior and organizational dynamics. They understand that power is not just about formal authority. It's about influence, perception, and the ability to shape outcomes without visible effort. Think of power like gravity. You can ignore it. You can resent it. You can wish it didn't exist. But the moment you step off a cliff, your opinion becomes irrelevant. The law asserts itself whether you believe in it or not. The wise don't complain about gravity. They study it, understand it, and use it to their advantage. Power operates by similar principles, invisible, constant, and fundamentally indifferent to your feelings about it. So where do you begin? Not with grand strategies or bold moves. You begin with observation. Watch how people react when resources are scarce. Notice who others look to before speaking in meetings. Observe who gets interrupted and who does the interrupting. Pay attention to who can silence a room just by entering it. These subtle dynamics reveal the true power structure that exists beneath the surface of formal hierarchies. The most dangerous players are not the ones with official titles or loud voices. They're the ones who have mastered the art of reading the game while appearing not to play it at all. They understand that true power rarely announces itself. It moves quietly, shapes events invisibly, and leaves no fingerprints on the outcomes it engineers. Your position in this game is not fixed, but your first move must be awareness. Start noticing the patterns that others miss. Who consistently gets their way without seeming to push? Who never seems to face direct opposition? Who do people defer to without being asked? These are not accidents. They are the results of skillful play. Remember, power is not just about domination. It's about understanding. It's about seeing the matrix of relationships and influences that shape every human environment. The game rewards those who can read these patterns and position themselves accordingly. It punishes those who refuse to acknowledge its existence. Your first task is not to win, it's to see. See the game for what it is. See the players for who they are. See yourself and your position with merciless clarity. Only then can you begin to move with purpose. The game doesn't care about your moral judgments. It doesn't respond to your complaints. About fairness, it rewards only one thing: competence. And competence begins with acceptance of what is, not what should be. So open your eyes. The game is already in motion. The question is not whether you'll play, you already are. The question is whether you'll play well enough to matter, whether you'll learn to read the board before making your moves, whether you'll develop the clarity to see opportunities where others see only obstacles. The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, choosing not to choose is still a choice, and in the game of power, it's usually the wrong one. Let me tell you about the greatest mistake I've witnessed in the halls of power. It's not incompetence. It's not lack of resources. It's not even poor timing. It's the fatal error of letting emotions cloud judgment. This single weakness has toppled more leaders, destroyed more opportunities, and squandered more advantages than any external threat could ever accomplish. You've seen it yourself, the leader who lashes out at criticism, revealing their insecurity. The negotiator who becomes personally invested in winning, forgetting their actual objective. The strategist who falls in love with their own plan, becoming blind to its flaws. The manager who promotes based on loyalty rather than competence, undermining their own foundation of power. These are not merely mistakes, they are emotional indulgences that have strategic consequences. This is why most people will never truly understand power. They're too busy feeling to think, too occupied with their emotional responses to see the strategic opportunities lying before them. They mistake their emotional reactions for clarity, their impulses for insight. Every decision becomes clouded by feelings that have no relevance to the actual dynamics at play. Consider this. Every time you react emotionally, you reveal information. Every display of anger is a confession of weakness. Every moment of visible frustration is a signal to your opponents that they've found your pressure point. Every burst of enthusiasm betrays what you value most. In the game of power, information is currency, and you're bankrupting yourself with every emotional display. The truly powerful maintain a state of cold clarity. This doesn't mean they don't feel, they simply don't let their feelings dictate their actions. They understand that emotions are tools to be used on others, not forces that should control oneself. They know that while everyone else is riding the emotional waves of each situation, the real opportunities lie in the calm depths below. When you hear of a setback, your first response should not be disappointment. It should be analysis. When you face opposition, your instinct should not be anger. It should be curiosity. What can this teach you about your position? What does this reveal about your adversaries? What opportunities does this create? These are the questions that lead to power. Emotional reactions lead only to predictability, and predictability is weakness. Think of emotions like weather. Everyone experiences them, but the wise don't build their strategies on the assumption of perpetual sunshine. They plan for storms. They prepare for changing winds. They remain effective regardless of the emotional climate. This is why history's greatest strategists often appeared cold to their contemporaries. They understood that warmth is a luxury that power cannot always afford. In critical moments, you need the clarity that only emotional distance can provide. But here's what most don't understand. This isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about transcending them. You must learn to observe your feelings without being governed by them. Use them as data points, not directives. Your anger tells you where your boundaries are being tested. Your fear points to areas where you need to build strength. Your enthusiasm signals opportunities that deserve closer examination. But none of these emotions should be allowed to make decisions for you. The most dangerous emotion isn't anger or fear, it's hope. Hope that things will naturally improve. Hope that others will see reason. Hope that you can win without engaging in the full complexity of power dynamics. Hope is the emotion that keeps people passive when they should be acting, patient when they should be moving, and trusting when they should be verifying. Watch how the truly powerful handle setbacks. They don't waste energy on frustration. They don't indulge in revenge fantasies. They immediately begin calculating their next move. While others are still processing their emotional responses, the powerful are already positioning themselves for new advantages. This emotional efficiency is what sets them apart. The next time you feel a strong emotional response rising, pause. Step back. Ask yourself, what would cold clarity see in this situation? What opportunities am I missing because I'm too busy feeling to think? What would this look like if I removed all emotional investment and saw it purely as a strategic scenario? This mental discipline is what separates players from pawns. Remember, the game of power is played in reality, not in the world of feelings. Every emotional reaction is a moment of blindness. Every passionate response is a strategic vulnerability. Master your emotions, or they will be used to master you. The choice between feeling good and being effective is one that the powerful make every day. Choose wisely. Here's a truth that will disturb you. Morality is not a fixed star by which to navigate. It's a tool wielded differently in different hands, serving different masters in different times. The sooner you understand this, the sooner you'll seize the world as it truly operates. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. And in the game of power, clarity is everything. Think about how often you've heard the phrase, the right thing to do. But right according to whom? Right in which context? Right. For what purpose? The wise understand that morality is not absolute. It's contextual, pragmatic, and above all, strategic. What's considered virtuous in one era is seen as weakness in another. What's praised in one culture is condemned in another, yet power flows consistently to those who understand how to navigate these shifting waters. This isn't about being evil. This is about being clear. When you see virtue and vice as tools rather than truths, you begin to understand how power actually works. The successful leader knows when to wear the mask of virtue and when that mask must be set aside for the sake of necessary action. They understand that moral reputation is a form of currency, to be accumulated and spent with careful calculation. Consider how often moral arguments are used as weapons. It's not right. It's unfair. It's against our principles. These are not just ethical statements, they're power moves designed to constrain action and control behavior. The truly powerful see through these tactics. They understand that moral outrage is often just manipulation wearing a noble disguise. When someone appeals to morality, your first question should not be, are they right? But rather, what are they trying to achieve? But here's where most go wrong. They think this means abandoning morality altogether. This is as naive as believing in absolute virtue. The skillful player understands that reputation matters. Public virtue is a form of capital that can be spent when necessary. The appearance of moral behavior creates trust, and trust creates opportunity. Your reputation for ethical behavior should be cultivated carefully, not out of genuine moral conviction, but because it gives you room to maneuver when circumstances require it. Watch how the truly powerful operate. They don't openly flout moral conventions. They work within them, around them, through them. They understand that being seen as moral is often more important than actually being moral. They know that a reputation for virtue can be more valuable than virtue itself. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity about how human societies actually function. The key is to understand that different situations require different tools. Sometimes, genuine virtue serves your purposes best. Sometimes, the appearance of virtue is more useful than the reality. And sometimes, yes, virtue must be set aside entirely for the sake of necessary action. The wise leader knows which approach serves their ends in each unique situation. Think of morality as a language rather than a law. Just as you might speak differently in different contexts, formal in a business meeting, casual with friends, your application of moral principles should be fluid, adaptive, and always in service of your larger objectives. The person who speaks only one moral language is limited in their ability to navigate complex human environments. Consider the most successful leaders in history. Did they achieve their positions by rigid adherence to moral principles, or did they understand when to be virtuous and when to be practical? The answer is always the latter. They knew that power requires flexibility, moral flexibility included. This understanding gives you power that others lack. While they wrestle with genuine moral dilemmas, you'll see the strategic layer beneath ethical considerations. While they waste energy on moral outrage, you'll be calculating your next move. While they bind themselves with rigid principles, you'll maintain the flexibility that power requires. Remember, in the game of power, every tool must serve a purpose. Morality is no exception. Use it when it serves you. Set it aside when it constrains you. But never let it blind you to the reality of how power actually works. The world rewards those who see it clearly, not those who see it as they wish it to be. Your task is not to be good or evil, it's to be effective. Let others debate morality. You must focus on results, because in the end, history judges by outcomes, not intentions. The power to shape those outcomes comes from seeing clearly, acting decisively, and understanding that morality, like everything else, is simply a tool in the greater game of power. The truly powerful understand this. Moral reputation is armor, not essence. Build yours carefully, maintain it diligently, but never. Let it prevent you from taking necessary action when the moment demands it. This is the way of power. All else is illusion. In the arena of power, what people believe happened is more important than what actually occurred. This is not a cynical observation. It's a fundamental truth about human nature. Perception shapes reality. The image of power creates the reality of power. Master the optics, and you master the game itself. Consider this. Why do some mediocre leaders rise while brilliant ones remain hidden? Why do certain ideas catch fire while better ones die in obscurity? Why do some failures become launching pads for success, while minor victories sometimes spell the end of careers? The answer lies not in the events themselves, but in how they're perceived, presented, and understood by others. The first principle of controlling optics is this. Everything you do sends a message, whether you intend it or not. Your arrival time at meetings, your choice of words, your reactions to crisis, your public associations, all of these create narratives in the minds of observers. The powerful understand this and ensure every action serves their intended story. Most people think reputation just happens to them. They believe their work should speak for itself. This is the thinking of amateurs. Your work doesn't speak. People speak about your work, and what they say depends not on the reality of your achievements, but on how those achievements are presented, packaged, and positioned in the minds of others. Here's what the masters of power understand. Perception has momentum. Once people believe something about you or your work, they will interpret new information to confirm their existing beliefs. This is why controlling the initial narrative is crucial. The first story people hear about an event often becomes the truth, regardless of what actually happened. Watch how the skilled manipulators operate. They don't wait for events to unfold and then react. They prepare the ground in advance. They plant seeds of narrative that will flower when needed. They build relationships with key opinion shapers before they need them. They understand that the battle for perception is won or lost long before the actual event takes place. But here's the subtle part. Obvious manipulation backfires. People resist when they feel they're being managed. The art lies in making your preferred narrative feel like the natural, obvious way to understand events. The best perception management feels like simple truth-telling to the audience. Consider your setbacks. A failure is not a failure if you control its interpretation. It can be a valuable learning experience, a strategic repositioning, or a necessary preparation for future success. The event doesn't change, but its meaning does. And in the game of power, meaning is everything. The same principle applies to your successes. A victory poorly presented can become a liability. A minor achievement well-positioned can become a career-defining moment. The difference lies not in the achievement itself, but in how it's framed, contextualized, and woven into your larger narrative. Master these specific techniques. First, always control the context. No event has meaning in isolation. By controlling the context in which people understand an event, you control its significance. Second, manage the timing of information. When something becomes known is often as important as what becomes known. Third, understand the power of contrast. People judge things not by absolute standards, but by comparison. Create the right comparisons, and you control how people evaluate events. Learn to see every interaction as an opportunity to shape perception. The casual conversation in the hallway, the brief email response, the way you handle a minor crisis, these are not just events to be dealt with. They are chances to reinforce or reshape how others see you and your power. But remember this crucial point. The goal is not deception. The goal is strategic truth-telling. Choose which truths to emphasize. Decide which aspects of reality deserve attention. Guide people's focus toward the elements that serve your objectives. This is not about lying. It's about curating reality. Your power depends not on what you can do, but on what others believe you can do. Not on what you have achieved, but on what others think you have achieved. Not on your actual intentions, but on how others interpret your intentions. Master this understanding, and you master the game itself. The final lesson is this. In the EOS, game of power, there is no objective reality. There is only what people believe. Shape those beliefs, and you shape the world. Control the optics, and you control the outcome. All else is commentary. The most dangerous player in any room is not the one speaking, it's the one observing. While others rush to fill the air with words, the true master of power watches, listens, and learns. Their silence is not passive. It is a weapon of accumulation. Every moment of restraint is a moment of gathering intelligence that others freely give away. Consider this paradox. Those most desperate to be heard are often those least worth hearing. The loudest voice in the room betrays its owner's insecurity, their desperate need for validation, their fundamental misunderstanding of how power truly operates. While they speak, they reveal. While they argue, they expose. Every word that leaves their lips is a piece of intelligence they can never reclaim. Here's what the masters of power understand. Silence creates mystery, and mystery creates power. When you speak less, people attribute more meaning to your words. When you reveal less, they imagine more depth to your thoughts. This is not manipulation, it's human nature. People fill silence with their own projections, their own fears, their own aspirations. Watch how the truly powerful operate in meetings. They don't jump into every discussion. They don't offer an opinion on every topic. They wait. They observe who speaks first, who defers to whom, who looks to others for approval before speaking. These subtle dynamics reveal the true power structure that formal hierarchies often obscure. But mere silence is not enough. You must learn to listen with purpose. Every complaint is a revelation of weakness. Every boast hints at insecurity. Every casual conversation contains intelligence about alliances, grievances, and opportunities. The skilled observer gathers these pieces of information like a spider collecting drops of dew. Each one may seem insignificant, but together they form a web of understanding that can ensnare the unwary. Most people listen only to respond. They're mentally preparing their next statement while others are speaking. This is the behavior of amateurs. The master of power listens to understand, to analyze, to identify patterns that others miss. They know that every person who speaks freely is teaching you how to influence them if only you pay attention. Here's a crucial principle. Power flows toward those who understand others better than others understand them. The more you know about someone's desires, fears, and motivations, the more effectively you can move them in the direction you desire. And people will tell you everything you need to know about themselves if you simply stay silent and let them talk. Learn to use strategic silence in negotiations. When others make offers or demands, don't rush to respond. Let the silence stretch. Watch them become uncomfortable. Watch them start to doubt themselves. Watch them begin to fill the void with concessions. The person who speaks first in a silence often loses ground, but silence must be wielded with precision. Too much can make you appear weak or indecisive. The art lies in knowing when to maintain silence and when to break it. When you do speak, make it count. Let your words carry the weight of all you've observed and understood. Let them demonstrate that while others were talking, you were thinking, analyzing, strategizing. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to be comfortable with silence. Don't fill conversational voids out of nervousness. Second, develop your observational skills. Notice not just what people say, but how they say it, who they look at while speaking, what they emphasize, and what they avoid mentioning. Third, practice strategic questioning. When you do speak, ask questions that reveal more about others while exposing nothing about yourself. Remember this. In any interaction, the person talking is giving away information. The person listening is gathering it. Which position serves power better? Every time you speak, you risk revealing your intentions, your concerns, your weaknesses. Every time you listen, you gather intelligence that can be used to advance your position. The final lesson is this. Influence begins long before you speak. It begins in the quiet moments of observation, in the patient gathering of intelligence, in the careful analysis of patterns and relationships. Your silence should not be empty. It should be filled with purpose, with analysis, with strategic thinking. Let others expose themselves through endless talk. Let them reveal their strengths, their weaknesses, their desires, and fears. Your power grows with every secret they unknowingly share, with every pattern they unconsciously reveal, with every weakness they unwittingly expose. Remember, the truly powerful don't need to announce their power. They let others do the talking, while they do the observing, the analyzing, the planning. In the game of power, silence is not just the absence of speech, it's the presence of opportunity. Before you move to lead, before you step forward to guide, before you offer your strength, first understand their weakness. This is the fundamental principle that separates true masters of power from mere opportunists. Power is not about forcing your will upon others. It's about becoming necessary to them. And necessity begins with understanding. Most people rush to demonstrate their capabilities, eager to prove their worth. This is the strategy of amateurs. They showcase their strengths before understanding where those strengths are needed. They offer solutions before fully grasping the problems. They speak before knowing what others need to hear. This approach may win momentary attention, but it rarely secures lasting power. The master of power operates differently. They know that every strength has value only in relation to a weakness. Every solution matters only in the context of a specific problem. Every offer of help gains power only when it addresses a genuine need. This is why understanding weakness must come first. It gives context and direction to your strength. Watch how the truly powerful build their influence. They don't begin by telling others what they can do. They begin by understanding what others cannot do. They don't start by showcasing their knowledge. They start by identifying gaps in others' understanding. They don't lead with their solutions. They lead with questions that reveal where solutions are most desperately needed. Here's a crucial truth. people don't follow strength. They follow strength that addresses their weakness. A brilliant strategist has no power in a room full of strategists. But that same strategist becomes invaluable in a room full of tactical experts who can't see the bigger picture. Your power grows not from your capabilities alone, but from how precisely those capabilities match others' deficiencies. Learn to diagnose before you prescribe. Every organization has its weak points. Every leader has their blind spots. Every team has its vulnerabilities. These are not just problems to be solved. They are opportunities for power to be established. But you must see them clearly before you can exploit them effectively. The skilled practitioner of power knows that weaknesses come in many forms. Sometimes they're obvious: lack of expertise, insufficient resources, missing capabilities, but often they're subtle: fear of failure, need for validation, desire for certainty. These psychological weaknesses, once understood, can be more valuable than any practical deficiency. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to listen for what people don't say. Their silences often reveal their insecurities. Second, watch for patterns of avoidance. What topics do people dance around? What decisions do they postpone? These are signposts pointing to weakness. Third, pay attention to where people seek reassurance. Their requests for confirmation often mask deeper uncertainties. But here's the subtle part: never reveal that you see their weakness. This knowledge is your advantage. Guard it carefully. When you move to help, do it in a way that preserves their dignity. The best power moves are those that leave others feeling stronger, not exposed. They should remember how you helped them, not how vulnerable they were when you did. Understanding weakness gives you another crucial advantage. It lets you position your strength precisely where it will have maximum impact. Don't be broadly capable. Be specifically invaluable. Don't offer everything you can do. Offer exactly what they need most. This targeted approach makes your power more concentrated and more difficult to replace. Remember this: in any power dynamic, the person who understands the other's weaknesses best has the upper hand. Not because they can exploit those weaknesses, though sometimes they must, but because they can position themselves as the solution, the support, the necessary ally in overcoming those weaknesses. The final lesson is this: true power isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the person whose strength is most relevant to others' weaknesses. It's about becoming not just useful, but necessary, not just helpful, but indispensable. Your task is not to prove your worth, but to understand where your worth is most needed. Not to showcase all you can do, but to focus on what others cannot do without you. This is how lasting power is built, not through force, but through necessity, not through dominance, but through understanding. Let others rush to display their strength. You must first understand their weakness, for in the game of power, the most dangerous person is not the one with the most capabilities, but the one who best understands where capabilities are most desperately needed. Let us speak plainly about a misunderstood art. Manipulation is not what the masses think it is. It is not crude lies or brutal force. It is not threats or deception. These are the tools of amateurs who understand neither the subtlety nor the beauty of true manipulation. Real manipulation is architecture, the careful design of circumstances that lead others to make the choices you desire. Think of yourself not as a deceiver, but as an architect of situations. The crude manipulator tells lies. The sophisticated manipulator creates contexts where the truth serves their purposes. They don't force false beliefs. They create environments where the desired beliefs become natural conclusions. This is the fundamental difference between deception and design. Consider how a skilled architect designs a building. They don't force people to move in certain ways. They create paths that make those movements natural. They don't demand that people gather in specific spaces. They design spaces that invite gathering. This is how sophisticated manipulation works. You don't push people toward decisions. You design circumstances that make those decisions inevitable. Most people fail at manipulation because they think too directly. They try to force outcomes, to push their agenda openly, to make others bend to their will. This is not manipulation, it's coercion. And coercion creates resistance. True manipulation works with human nature, not against it. It makes the desired choice feel like the natural choice, the obvious choice, the choice that others believe. They made independently. Here's a crucial principle. People resist being pushed, but they welcome being guided. They reject obvious manipulation, but they embrace helpful frameworks. Your task is not to force decisions, but to create contexts where the decision you want become the most attractive options available. This is not deception, it's architecture. Watch how the masters of this art operate. They don't tell people what to think. They control which information people encounter first. They don't demand specific conclusions. They ensure that the available premises naturally lead to those conclusions. They don't force choices. They eliminate alternatives until the desired choice becomes the most appealing option. The skilled manipulator understands that humans make decisions based on context, not just content. Change the context, and you change the decision without ever having to argue for it directly. This is why controlling the environment is more powerful than controlling the argument. The environment shapes how arguments are received, how options are evaluated, how choices are made. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to control the frame, the context in which situations are understood. The same fact can lead to different conclusions depending on how it's framed. Second, manage the timing of information. When people learn things is often as important as what they learn. Third, create circumstances that make your preferred outcome appear to be people's own idea. But here's the subtle part. Your manipulations must remain invisible. The moment people realize they're being manipulated, resistance becomes inevitable. Your influence should feel like the natural unfolding of events, like the logical progression of circumstances. Your hand should never be seen moving the pieces. Understanding human psychology is crucial. People need to feel autonomous. They need to believe their choices are their own. Your task is not to override these needs, but to work with them. Design situations where the autonomous choice, the choice they make freely, is the choice you want them to make. Remember this: every environment is a form of manipulation. Every context influences behavior. Every situation shapes decisions. The only question is whether these influences are working for your objectives or against them. The skilled manipulator doesn't try to overcome these environmental forces. They align them with their goals. The final lesson is this: true power lies not in forcing people to do what you want, but in making them want what you want them to do. This is not achieved through deception, but through design. Not through lies, but through architecture. Not through force, but through framework. Your task is not to push against human nature, but to work with it. Not to demand compliance, but to design circumstances where compliance becomes the most attractive option. Not to force decisions, but to shape the environment in which decisions are made. Let others rely on crude deception and brute force. You must understand the art of design. For in the game of power, the most effective manipulation is the one that feels like freedom. The most powerful influence is the one that feels like choice. The most lasting control is the one that feels like autonomy. This is the true art of manipulation, not to deceive, but to design, not to force, but to architect, not to push, but to shape. Master this understanding, and you master the subtle art of guiding human behavior without ever seeming to guide it at all. In the game of power, what you hide is often more valuable than what you show. Mystery is not merely about keeping secrets, it's about creating space for power to grow. The moment you reveal everything you can do, everything you know, everything you intend, you place a ceiling on your potential influence. Keep them guessing, and your power remains limitless in their minds. Consider this fundamental truth. People's imagination of what you might be capable of is often more powerful than the reality of what you can actually do. The moment you define your limits precisely, you give others the ability to calculate their moves with certainty. But keep your capabilities partially hidden, and they must always account for the unknown. This uncertainty is a source of power. Most people fail in this art because they cannot resist the urge to prove themselves. They showcase their talents at every opportunity. They speak of their accomplishments at length. They reveal their strategies to demonstrate their cleverness. This need for validation is a weakness that undermines true power. The master of power understands that validation is a trap. The moment you seek it, you surrender control. Watch how the truly powerful operate. They never show all their resources at once. They never reveal the full extent of their connections. They never demonstrate the complete range of their capabilities. They understand that partial knowledge creates respect, while complete knowledge enables others to strategize against you. Effectively, here's a crucial principle. In any interaction, the person who knows less about you than you know about them is at a disadvantage. Every piece of information you reveal shifts this balance. Every capability you demonstrate gives others data points to calculate their approach. Every intention you make clear allows them to prepare their countermoves. The skilled practitioner of power knows that mystery creates value. When people aren't sure what you're capable of, they tend to overestimate rather than underestimate. When they don't know your limits, they proceed with caution. When they can't predict your next move, they must prepare for multiple possibilities, spreading their resources thin while you remain focused. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to demonstrate capability without revealing capacity. Show enough to be respected, but never so much that others can precisely measure your limits. Second, cultivate strategic ambiguity about your connections and resources. Let others wonder who else might be in your network, what other cards you might be holding. Third, practice the art of partial revelation, giving others enough information to act, but never enough to act with complete confidence. But here's the subtle part. Mystery must be balanced with credibility. You can't be completely opaque. That creates distrust rather than respect. The art lies in revealing enough to establish your power while maintaining enough uncertainty to enhance it. Your demonstrated capabilities should hint at greater depths rather than expose them fully. Remember this: every time you reveal something about yourself, you're not just sharing information, you're surrendering power. The information others have about you is a tool they can use to predict, influence, and potentially control you. The less they know with certainty, the more they must account for possibility. The wise leader understands that their power lies not just in what they can do, but in what others believe they might be able to do. This is why they never correct overestimations of their capability. This is why they let rumors of their influence circulate without confirmation or denial. This is why they keep their true limits hidden, even from their allies. Learn to use silence as a canvas upon which others paint their assumptions. Learn to let your partial achievements suggest greater capabilities. Learn to make your demonstrated powers hint at hidden strengths. The goal is not to deceive, but to allow others' imaginations to work in your favor. Consider this: in any negotiation, the person whose limits are unknown has an advantage over the person whose resources are fully revealed. In any conflict, the opponent whose capabilities remain partially hidden commands more respect than the one whose strengths and weaknesses are fully mapped. In any alliance, the partner whose full potential remains undefined holds more value than the one whose usefulness has been fully measured. The final lesson is this: your power grows in the space between what others know about you and what they wonder about you. Guard this space carefully. Never fill it completely with revelations. Let it remain fertile ground for assumptions, speculations, and respectful caution. Let others rush to prove themselves completely. You must maintain your mystery, for in the game of power, the most dangerous player is not the one with the most capabilities, but the one whose capabilities cannot be fully known or measured. Loyalty is a currency that inflates with time. Today's devoted follower becomes tomorrow's independent agent. Today's faithful ally becomes next year's competitor. This is the fatal flaw in building power solely on loyalty. It is as changeable as the winds of fortune. But dependency endures. Create systems where others need you more than you need them, and you create power that persists beyond mood or circumstance. Consider this fundamental truth. People will remain loyal only as long as the cost of betrayal exceeds the benefits of alternatives. But they will remain dependent as long as you control resources vital to their success. This is why the wise leader focuses not on cultivating personal devotion, but on becoming institutionally indispensable. Most people misunderstand this principle. They think dependency must be obvious and crude, like a drug dealer's hold over an addict. But sophisticated dependency is subtle. It's the expertise that nobody else quite has. It's the network that cannot be easily replicated. It's the system that works so smoothly that nobody wants to risk changing it. These are the golden handcuffs that bind more surely than any chain. Watch how the masters of power operate. They don't just solve problems, they become part of the solution that cannot be easily removed. They don't just provide value. They integrate themselves into the value chain so deeply that extracting them would cause more pain than keeping them. They understand that being useful is temporary, but being necessary is permanent. Here's a crucial principle. The strongest dependency is one that the dependent party doesn't resent or resist. Your goal is not to create obvious chains, but to build systems where working with you is simply the most attractive option available. The art lies in making dependency feel like a choice, not a constraint. The skilled practitioner of power knows that dependency has many faces. Sometimes it's knowledge, expertise that others rely on but cannot easily duplicate. Sometimes it's relationships, connections that others need but cannot access without you. Sometimes it's systems, processes you've designed that others have built their own success upon. The more varied and interwoven these dependencies become, the more secure your position grows. Master these specific techniques. First, identify critical needs that you can fill better than anyone else. Don't try to be good at everything. Become indispensable at something essential. Second, create systems that work so well that changing them becomes risky and expensive. Third, position yourself as the hub through which important resources or information must flow. But here's the subtle part. True dependency must be sustainable. If you make the cost of depending on you too high, people will invest in alternatives. If you make the nature of dependency too obvious, people will resist it. The art lies in creating situations where continuing to work with you is simply easier, safer, and more beneficial than any other option. Remember this: every service you provide, every solution you create, every system you design is an opportunity to build dependency. Don't just solve the immediate problem. Solve it in a way that makes you part of the ongoing solution. Don't just provide value. Provide it in a way that makes your continued involvement valuable. The wise leader understands that power built on dependency is more reliable than power built on loyalty. Loyalty can be swayed by emotion, circumstance, or competing offers. But well-designed dependency creates its own momentum. The more people build their success on the foundation you provide, the more invested they become in maintaining your position. Learn to make yourself necessary without making yourself obvious. Learn to create situations where your involvement is crucial but not costly. Learn to build systems where your continued participation is beneficial to all parties, but slightly more beneficial to you. Consider this. In any organization, the person who controls essential resources or processes has more real power than those with mere formal authority. In any relationship, the party who needs the other less holds the stronger position. In any system, the element that cannot be easily replaced has intrinsic value regardless of sentiment or circumstance. This is not about creating unfair advantage or exploitative relationships. It's about understanding that in the game of power, being needed is more valuable than being liked. Being essential is more powerful than being admired. Being irreplaceable is more secure than being respected. The final lesson is this: don't seek to be valued, seek to be necessary. Don't build systems that function through loyalty, build ones that function through dependency. Don't create relationships based on sentiment, create ones based on mutual need, but tilted slightly in your favor. Let others chase the fleeting power of personal loyalty. You must build the enduring power of structural necessity. For in the game of power, the most secure position is not held by the most loved, but by the most needed. In the theater of power, there is a persistent illusion that clouds the judgment of the naive, the belief that alliances are about friendship, trust, or shared values. Let us dispel this fantasy. Alliances are instruments of convenience, tools for achieving specific ends. The moment you forget this, the moment you begin treating allies as friends rather than assets, you have already begun to lose. Consider this eternal truth. Every alliance is a business transaction, disguised as a relationship. The currency might be influence, protection, resources, or information, but there is always a ledger being kept, always a calculation being made. The wise leader understands this and plans accordingly, while fools mistake temporary alignment of interests for permanent bonds of loyalty. Most people fail in managing alliances because they become emotionally invested. They begin to trust when they should verify. They assume continuity when they should expect change. They mistake temporary cooperation for lasting loyalty. This sentimental approach to alliance building is a weakness that will inevitably be exploited. Watch how the masters of power handle their alliances. They never become too dependent on a single ally. They never reveal all their resources or intentions, even to their closest partners. They maintain multiple channels of influence, multiple sources of support, multiple options for every critical need. They understand that today's ally might be tomorrow's opponent, and they prepare accordingly. Here's a crucial principle. Every alliance has an expiration date. It might not be marked on any calendar, but it exists, determined by the point at which the interests that created it no longer align. Your task is not to prevent this expiration, but to recognize it before it arrives and prepare accordingly. The skilled practitioner of power knows that alliances must be actively managed. They must be regularly assessed for their continuing value. They must be maintained with precisely calibrated effort, enough to keep them viable, but never more than their worth to your objectives. And they must be dissolved or restructured when their cost exceeds their utility. Master these specific techniques. First, maintain multiple alliances that can check and balance each other. Never let a single ally become so important that their departure would cripple your position. Second, always keep alternative options visible to your current allies, not as threats, but as reminders that the relationship must remain mutually beneficial. Third, regularly audit your alliances for their continued value and adjust your investment accordingly. But here's the subtle part. You must maintain the appearance of commitment while preserving your strategic flexibility. Your allies should feel secure in the relationship while you remain free to adjust or end it as circumstances require. This requires careful management of expectations and perceptions. Remember this, in every alliance there is a ledger being kept. Every favor given creates an obligation. Every resource shared creates a debt. Every support offered builds an account that will eventually require balancing. The wise leader keeps these accounts slightly in their favor, never so much that it prompts rebellion, but enough to maintain leverage. Learn to evaluate alliances dispassionately. Ask yourself, what does this alliance provide that I cannot easily obtain elsewhere? What is the real cost of maintaining it? What are the risks of dissolving it? What alternatives exist or could be developed? These questions should be revisited regularly, not just in times of crisis. Consider how the truly powerful manage their networks. They don't collect allies like trophies to be displayed. They cultivate them like tools to be maintained, upgraded, or replaced as circumstances require. They understand that the value of an alliance lies not in its longevity, but in its utility. This is not cynicism, it's clarity. Every alliance is a tool serving specific purposes. When those purposes change or when better tools become available, only a fool clings to outdated arrangements out of sentiment or habit. The skilled practitioner of power maintains relationships exactly as long as they serve their purpose, and not a moment longer. The final lesson is this: your alliances should be carefully chosen, professionally managed, and dispassionately evaluated. They should be maintained with precisely the effort their value justifies, no more, no less. They should be structured to serve your interests while appearing to serve mutual benefits. And they should be dissolved without hesitation when their cost exceeds their worth. Let others build their power on the unstable foundation of friendship and trust. You must build yours on the solid ground of mutual interest and calculated advantage. For in the game of power, the most reliable alliance is not the one based on loyalty or friendship, but the one where both parties clearly understand its utility and limits. Your task is not to collect allies, but to cultivate tools, not to build friendships, but to construct leverage, not to create permanent bonds, but to manage temporary alignments of interest. This is how lasting power is built, not through the uncertain currency of trust, but through the reliable mechanism of mutual advantage. Let us speak an uncomfortable truth that the weak-minded refuse to acknowledge. In the architecture of power, fear is a foundation stone, while love is merely decorative trim. This is not a statement of cruelty. It is an observation of human nature. Love is fickle, emotional, and subject to change. Fear, properly maintained, is consistent, rational, and reliable. Consider this fundamental reality. People will betray their love when circumstances demand it, but they will honor their fears even against their own desires. Love is a fair-weather companion that often abandons ship when storms arrive. Fear remains steady through all weather, guiding behavior even in the darkest times. This is why the wise leader builds their power on a foundation of fear while using love as a pleasant but optional embellishment. Most people misunderstand the nature of fear and power dynamics. They think it must be crude and obvious, threats, intimidation, visible displays of force. But sophisticated fear is subtle. It's the quiet understanding that crossing you would be unwise. It's the unspoken knowledge that opposition carries consequences. It's the gentle awareness that your good graces have tangible value. Watch how the masters of power operate. They don't threaten, they imply. They don't intimidate, they educate. They make sure that others understand, without explicit statements, that cooperation is vastly more profitable than opposition. They create situations where fear naturally arises from rational calculation rather than emotional terror. Here's a crucial principle. The most effective fear is not the fear of what you might do, but the fear of what might happen naturally as a consequence of opposing you. When people believe that their success depends on their alignment with your interests, you have created a fear more reliable than any threat could produce. The skilled practitioner of power knows that fear has many faces. Sometimes it's the fear of losing opportunity. Sometimes it's the fear of being excluded from important circles. Sometimes it's the fear of finding oneself opposed by superior resources. The art lies in letting others choose which fear motivates them, while ensuring that all roads lead to compliance with your wishes. Master these specific techniques. First, demonstrate consequences without directly causing them. Let it be known how those who opposed you in the past encountered difficulties, not through your action, but through their own poor choice. Second, create systems where rewards flow naturally to those who align with you and dry up for those who don't. Third, maintain a reputation for having both the capability and the willingness to respond to opposition when necessary. But here's the subtle part. Fear must be balanced. Too much fear creates desperation, and desperate people become unpredictable. Too little fear creates complacency, and complacent people become unreliable. The art lies in maintaining just enough fear to ensure compliance while avoiding enough to prevent rebellion. Remember this: love creates fair-weather friends who will support you when it's easy and desert you when it's difficult. Fear creates reliable allies who will support you even against their own inclinations because they understand the cost of doing otherwise. This is not about being cruel. It's about being effective. The wise leader understands that being feared does not mean being hated. Indeed, the most sophisticated practitioners of power are often both feared and admired. They create situations where following their lead is both the safest and most profitable course of action. They make alignment with their interests the most rational choice available. Learn to build systems where fear arises naturally from the structure of relationships rather than from explicit threats. Learn to create circumstances where opposing you would be obviously unwise rather than obviously dangerous. Learn to let others discover the advantages of compliance and the disadvantages of opposition without having to point them out directly. Consider this: in any organization, the person everyone seeks to please is not necessarily the most loved, but invariably the most feared not for their cruelty, but for their capacity to influence outcomes. In any relationship, the party who can walk away with the least damage holds the strongest position. In any system, those who control critical resources or opportunities command the most reliable influence. The final lesson is this: don't seek to be loved, seek to be necessary. Don't build power on the shifting sands of affection. Build it on the solid rock of rational self-interest. Don't rely on what people want to do. Rely on what they understand they must do. Let others chase the fleeting power of adoration. You must build the lasting power of respected fear. For in the game of power, it is better to be reliably feared than unreliably loved. Better to be consistently necessary than inconsistently cherished. Better to be rationally obeyed than emotionally admired. Your task is not to win hearts, but to influence calculations. Not to be loved, but to be inevitable. Not to be popular, but to be necessary. This is how lasting power is built, not through the uncertain currency of affection, but through the reliable mechanism of rational fear. Of all the weapons in the arsenal of power, none is more potent than human vanity. A person's ego is both their greatest vulnerability and your greatest opportunity. Those who understand this truth hold a key that unlocks doors no amount of force could break down. For in the game of power, flattery is not just a social lubricant, it's a precision instrument of influence. Consider this eternal truth: people will reject naked manipulation, resist obvious control, and fight direct coercion. But they will eagerly embrace these same things when wrapped in the silken cloth of validation. The ego hungers for confirmation of its own importance, and in that hunger lies your opportunity to guide, shape, and ultimately control. Most people deploy flattery with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. They offer obvious compliments, transparent praise, and clumsy validation that insults the intelligence of their target. This is amateur hour. The master of power understands that sophisticated ego manipulation is an art that requires precision, timing, and deep psychological insight. Watch how the true practitioners of this art operate. They don't just compliment, they create contexts where others can demonstrate their brilliance. They don't just praise, they build stages where others can perform their excellence. They understand that the most powerful flattery is not what you say about someone, but what you allow them to believe about themselves. Here is a crucial principle. Every person carries within them an image of their ideal self. Your task is not to simply compliment who they are, but to mirror back to them who they wish to be. When you become the audience before whom they can perform their best self, you gain power that no amount of resources could purchase. The skilled manipulator of ego knows that vanity has many faces. For some, it's intellectual brilliance. For others, moral virtue. For still others, practical capability or social influence. The art lies in identifying which form of greatness each person aspires to, then becoming the mirror that reflects that aspiration back to them. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to listen not just for what people say, but for what they want to be true about themselves. Second, create situations where they can demonstrate the qualities they most want to be recognized for. Third, become the audience that appreciates exactly what they most wish to be appreciated about themselves. But here's the subtle part. Your manipulation of ego must never appear manipulative. The moment someone suspects they're being flattered for effect, the spell is broken. Your appreciation must appear genuine, your recognition natural, your validation spontaneous. The art lies in making others feel seen rather than studied. Remember this, everyone is the hero of their own story. Your task is not to challenge this narrative, but to become a supporting character who helps them perform their role more convincingly. When you validate people's chosen narrative about themselves, you gain influence over how that narrative develops. The wise practitioner of power understands that ego manipulation is not about deception, it's about selective emphasis. Everyone has qualities worthy of praise. The art lies in emphasizing exactly those qualities that, when recognized, make the person most amenable to your influence. Learn to use praise as a sculptor uses a chisel, not to create something false, but to reveal the form that lies within the stone. Learn to recognize what people yearn to believe about themselves, then become the evidence that confirms those beliefs. Learn to be the mirror in which others see their ideal reflection. Consider this. In any interaction, the person who can validate another's self-image holds tremendous power. In any relationship, the party who becomes the audience for another's performance of excellence gains subtle but significant control. In any system, those who can confer the recognition others crave become essential to those others' sense of self. This is not about creating false pride or inflating empty egos. It's about understanding that everyone needs validation, and the person who can provide that validation gains influence over the recipient. It's about recognizing that the need to feel important, significant, and appreciated is a fundamental human drive that can be channeled to serve your objectives. The final lesson is this. Don't fight against ego. Align with it. Don't challenge self-image. Support it strategically. Don't resist vanity. Guide it. For in the game of power, the most reliable path to influence is not through confrontation but through validation, not through challenge but through confirmation, not through reality but through the reality people wish to believe about themselves. Let others waste energy fighting against human nature. You must learn to work with it. For in the dance of power, the partner who can lead while making others feel like they're choosing the steps is the one who ultimately decides the direction. In the marketplace of power, every action has a price, and every engagement must yield a return. This is not greed, it's strategy. The moment you engage in conflicts, expend resources, or take positions without calculating the return, you have already begun to lose. Every battle must serve your empire, every move must advance your position, every conflict must pay its way. Consider this fundamental truth. Power is a finite resource. Your time, your energy, your reputation, your influence, these are currencies that, once spent, are not easily regained. The amateur rushes into every fight that presents itself. The master engages only in conflicts that promise returns greater than their investment. Most people fail in this art because they fight for pride, for principle, for emotion. They engage in battles because they feel challenged, because they feel righteous, because they feel angry. This is the behavior of pawns, not players. The skilled practitioner of power never confuses emotional satisfaction with strategic advantage. Watch how the true masters operate. They don't fight every battle they could win, only those worth winning. They don't defend every position they could, hold only those vital to their larger strategy. They understand that victory without profit is merely expensive exercise, and principle without purpose is simply costly indulgence. Here's a crucial principle. Every conflict you engage in has both visible and hidden costs. The visible costs are time, resources, and energy. The hidden costs are opportunity cost, reputation risk, and strategic revelation. Before you engage, all these costs must be weighed against potential returns. The skilled strategist knows that profitable conflict takes many forms. Sometimes the profit is immediate and tangible, resources gained, position secured, advantages established. Sometimes it's long-term and strategic, reputation enhanced, precedent set, alliances tested. The art lies in ensuring that every engagement serves multiple purposes, creating layers of return on your investment. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to calculate total cost before engagement, not just what you'll spend, but what you'll reveal about your capabilities and methods. Second, identify multiple potential benefits from each conflict, immediate gains, strategic advantages, and future opportunities. Third, maintain the discipline to walk away from fights that don't offer sufficient return, no matter how emotionally tempting they might be. But here's the subtle part. You must learn to make even necessary battles pay for themselves. When you must fight, when engagement is unavoidable, find ways to extract value beyond the immediate objective. Use the conflict to test allies, to reveal opponents' capabilities, to establish useful precedents for future situations. Remember this, in the game of power, there are no free moves. Every action you take, every position you defend, every battle you engage in costs you something. The wise leader ensures that these costs are always outweighed by the benefits, either immediate or strategic, tangible or positional. Learn to recognize the different forms of profit. Sometimes it's obvious, resources gained, position secured, advantages established. Sometimes it's subtle, information gathered, relationships tested, reputations enhanced. Sometimes it's strategic, precedent set, patterns established, future opportunities created. Every engagement should yield returns in multiple categories. Consider how the truly powerful choose their battles. They don't just ask, "Can I win?" They ask, "What do I gain if I win?" They don't just calculate the cost of engagement. They calculate the opportunity cost of resources tied up in conflict. They understand that even victory can be expensive if it doesn't serve their larger strategy. This principle applies beyond obvious conflict. Every meeting you attend, every favor you grant, every position you take has a cost. These costs must be measured and weighed against potential returns. Your time and attention are finite resources. Spend them only where they yield appropriate returns. The final lesson is this: never engage without clear purpose. Never fight without calculated advantage. Never expend resources without defined returns. The game of power is not about winning every battle. It's about winning the battles that advance your position while avoiding those that deplete your resources. Let others exhaust themselves in meaningless conflicts. Let them waste their power on emotional engagements. Let them deplete their resources on principled stands that yield no strategic advantage. You must be more disciplined, more calculated, more strategic. Your task is not to win every fight, it's to win the fights worth winning. Not to defend every position, but to defend the positions vital to your strategy. Not to engage in every conflict, but to engage in conflicts that pay dividends beyond their cost. For in the game of power, the most dangerous opponent is not the one who fights the hardest, but the one who fights the smartest. Not the one who never loses, but the one who never fights without profit. Not the one who engages in every battle, but the one who chooses battles that serve their empire. In the grand chess game of power, there exists a truth that the timid dare not embrace. Sometimes, to establish order, you must first create chaos. When you cannot win in stable conditions, when the existing structure resists your advance, when conventional paths to power are blocked, destabilization becomes not just an option, but a necessity. The master of power knows that in turbulent waters, the skilled navigator has advantage over the larger ship. Consider this fundamental principle. Established systems naturally resist change. They are designed to maintain current power structures, to perpetuate existing hierarchies, to preserve the status quo. When these systems work against your interests, trying to succeed within their constraints is like trying to win a rigged game. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the game itself. Most people fail to understand this art because they fear chaos. They cling to stability even when stability works against them. They prefer the predictable pain of their current position to the uncertain opportunity of disruption. This is the thinking of pawns, not players. The master of power knows that controlled chaos is one of the most potent tools in their arsenal. Watch how the true practitioners of this art operate. They don't create obvious disruption. They introduce subtle instabilities. They don't launch direct attacks on established orders. They create conditions where those orders begin to question themselves. They understand that the most effective destabilization looks natural, inevitable, almost accidental. Here's a crucial principle. In times of stability, power flows through established channels that may be closed to you. But in times of uncertainty, new pathways emerge, new alliances become possible, new opportunities arise. Your task is not to simply create chaos, but to create the specific kind of instability that best serves your objectives. The skilled practitioner of chaos knows that destabilization has many forms. Sometimes it's introducing new information that challenges established assumptions. Sometimes it's creating situations that force rigid systems to adapt. Sometimes it's simply changing the pace or pattern of events until existing structures struggle to keep up. The art lies in choosing the form of destabilization that creates opportunities you are uniquely positioned to exploit. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to identify the load-bearing pillars of current stability. Which relationships, beliefs, or processes keep the current order in place. Second, develop methods to introduce doubt or strain into these critical points without appearing to be the source. Third, prepare to operate effectively in the uncertainty you create, positioning yourself as a source of solutions rather than problems. But here's the subtle part. Your role in creating instability must remain invisible. You should appear to be responding to chaos, not causing it. The most effective destabilization seems to arise from natural causes, from the system's own contradictions, from inevitable processes rather than deliberate action. Remember this: every stable system contains within it the seeds of its own disruption. Your task is not to plant these seeds, but to water them selectively, to identify existing tensions and amplify them strategically, to find natural fault lines and apply pressure at precisely the right points. The wise practitioner of power understands that destabilization is not an end in itself. It's a means to establish new order. The chaos you create should be controlled, purposeful, designed to create specific opportunities that you are prepared to exploit. You're not destroying structure. You're creating conditions for a new structure that better serves your interests. Learn to recognize when systems are vulnerable to disruption. Look for signs of rigidity, for resistance to necessary change, for tensions between stated principles and actual practices. These are the pressure points where small actions can cascade into significant destabilization. Consider this. In any organization, those who can operate effectively in uncertainty have advantage over those who require stability. In any relationship, the party who is comfortable with change has power over the party that fears it. In any system, those who can navigate chaos while others flounder will naturally rise to positions of influence. The final lesson is this: don't fear chaos, learn to use it. Don't avoid instability, learn to create it purposefully. Don't wait for systems to change. Create conditions that make change inevitable. For in the game of power, the most dangerous player is not the strongest, but the one who can turn disruption into opportunity. Your task is not to maintain order, but to shape it, not to preserve stability, but to manage instability, not to prevent chaos, but to guide it toward your objectives. This is how lasting power is built, not through rigid control, but through the ability to create and exploit constructive chaos. Let others cling to the familiar. Let them seek security in stable structures. Let them fear uncertainty and avoid disruption. You must be bolder, more strategic, more comfortable with controlled chaos. For in the dance of power, sometimes the surest path to dominance is through carefully orchestrated destabilization. In the architecture of power, information is not just knowledge. It's currency, weapon, and shield all at once. Those who control its flow control reality itself. For in the game of power, what people know when they know it and how they come. To know it matters more than what actually exists. The master of information doesn't just participate in the game, they shape the board on which it's played. Consider this fundamental truth. People can only act on what they know. Their decisions, their strategies, their very understanding of what's possible, all are bounded by the information available to them. Control that availability, and you control the parameters within which others must operate. This is not manipulation, it's architecture. Most people fail in this art because they think too directly. They try to control information through simple secrecy or obvious censorship. This is amateur thinking. The skilled practitioner understands that information control is about flow, timing, and context. It's not about preventing knowledge. It's about shaping how knowledge is received and understood. Watch how the masters of this art operate. They don't just restrict information, they curate it. They don't just release data, they create narratives. They understand that information without context is noise, and context can be controlled even when facts cannot. They know that timing and sequence matter as much as content. Here's a crucial principle. Information exists in patterns, not pieces. Control the pattern, and individual facts lose their power to disrupt. Create the right context, and even challenging information can serve your purposes. The art lies not in hiding truth, but in shaping how truth is understood. The skilled information's architect knows that control takes many forms. Sometimes it's about scarcity, making certain knowledge precious. Sometimes it's about abundance, drowning crucial details in seas of irrelevance. Sometimes it's about timing, releasing information when it serves you best. The power lies in choosing the right approach for each situation. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to create information hierarchies, layers of knowledge that you can reveal selectively to different audiences. Second, develop multiple channels of information flow that you can activate or restrict as needed. Third, maintain control over the context in which information is received and interpreted. But here's the subtle part. Your control must appear natural, inevitable, almost invisible. The most effective information architecture doesn't look like control at all. It looks like the natural flow of knowledge through established channels. Your hand should never be seen guiding the current. Remember this: every piece of information creates ripples. The wise leader doesn't try to prevent all ripples. They shape them, direct them, use them to create patterns that serve their purposes. They understand that information, like water, will find its way through any system. The art lies in designing the channels through which it flows. Learn to see information as a strategic resource. Every fact, every detail, every piece of knowledge has potential value, not just in its content, but in when and how it's revealed. Learn to stockpile valuable information. Learn to release it strategically. Learn to use its flow to create advantage. Consider how the truly powerful manage their information networks. They don't just gather intelligence, they create systems where valuable information naturally flows toward them. They don't just distribute knowledge, they create dependencies. Through controlled access to crucial information, they make themselves essential nodes in the networks they build. This principle applies beyond mere secrets. Even public information can be controlled through timing, context, and presentation. The same fact released at different times, in different contexts through different channels, can create vastly different effects. Master this understanding, and even widely known information becomes a tool in your arsenal. The final lesson is this: don't just manage information, architect its flow. Don't just control secrets, shape understanding. Don't just restrict knowledge, guide its interpretation. For in the game of power, the most dangerous player is not the one who knows the most, but the one who best controls how knowledge is distributed and understood. Your task is not to become an information hoarder, but an information architect. Not to create walls around knowledge, but channels through which it flows according to your design. Not to prevent understanding, but to shape how understanding develops. Let others scramble to gather every fact they can find. Let them pride themselves on knowing everything. Let them exhaust themselves trying to control every piece of information. You must be more strategic, more architectural in your approach. For in the game of power, victory doesn't go to those who know the most, but to those who best control how knowledge flows. Not to those who gather the most intelligence, but to those who most skillfully shape how intelligence is understood and used. Not to those who hoard information, but to those who architect its movement through the system. This is how lasting power is built, not through mere possession of knowledge, but through mastery of its flow. Not through controlling all information, but through controlling the crucial channels through which information moves and means something. In the theater of power, appearances are weapons, and misconception is an art form. The greatest advantage often lies not in what power you possess, but in what power others believe you lack. For in the game of influence, being underestimated is not a disadvantage, it's an opportunity. The master of power knows that seeming weak while being strong creates opportunities that strength alone could never provide. Consider this fundamental truth. People defend against the threats they perceive, not the threats that exist. When they believe you weak, they lower their guard. When they underestimate your capabilities, they expose their vulnerabilities. When they dismiss your potential, they reveal their own weaknesses. This is why appearing weak while being strong is not deception, it's strategic positioning. Most people fail in this art because they cannot resist the urge to demonstrate their power. They showcase their strengths, display their capabilities, broadcast their advantages. This is the behavior of amateurs. The master of power understands that obvious strength invites resistance, while perceived weakness invites opportunity. Watch how the true practitioners of this art operate. They don't just hide their power, they create convincing illusions of limitation. They don't just downplay their capabilities, they craft personas that others want to underestimate. They understand that the most effective disguise is one that appeals to what others already want to believe. Here's a crucial principle. People's assumptions about your weakness become their own vulnerability. When they believe you limited, they act carelessly. When they think you powerless, they expose themselves. When they dismiss you as harmless, they reveal their strategies. The art lies in maintaining these useful misconceptions while building real power behind them. The skilled practitioner knows that appearing weak takes many forms. Sometimes it's displaying carefully chosen limitations. Sometimes it's allowing others to believe they have advantages they don't actually possess. Sometimes it's simply being dismissed as non-threatening. The power lies in choosing the right form of perceived weakness to create specific opportunities. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to identify what kinds of weakness others want to see in you. Then, present those precisely. Second, develop the discipline to maintain these appearances even when you could prove them wrong. Third, create situations where others' belief in your weakness leads them to make exploitable mistakes. But here's the subtle part. Your apparent weakness must be believable. It must align with what others expect and want to believe. The most effective disguise is one that confirms existing biases and comfortable assumptions. Your perceived limitations should seem natural, almost inevitable. Remember this: every assumption of your weakness is a brick in the foundation of your advantage. The wise leader doesn't fight against these assumptions. They cultivate them carefully, shape them purposefully, use them strategically. They understand that being underestimated is an asset that must be managed as carefully as any other resource. Learn to recognize the power of perceived weakness. When others think you naive, they reveal their sophistication. When they believe you uninformed, they display their knowledge. When they dismiss you as powerless, they expose their own power structures. These revelations are the reward for your carefully crafted appearance of limitation. Consider how the truly powerful use this principle. They don't just accept being underestimated, they encourage it. They don't just allow misconceptions, they craft them. They understand that the difference between their perceived capability and their actual power is their margin of strategic advantage. This principle applies beyond obvious power dynamics, even in collaborative situations. Allowing others to underestimate your capabilities can create advantages. When they believe they're helping you, they often reveal more than they intend. When they think they're teaching you, they expose their own methods and thinking. The final lesson is this: don't fight against being underestimated. Learn to use it. Don't resist others' assumptions of your limitations. Shape them. Don't correct misconceptions about your weakness. Exploit them. For in the game of power, the most dangerous player is not the one who appears strongest, but the one whose true strength remains unknown. Your task is not to appear powerful, but to be powerful while appearing otherwise. Not to demonstrate capability, but to build it quietly behind a carefully maintained facade of limitation. Not to correct others' underestimation, but to turn it into strategic advantage. Let others parade their power. Let them showcase their strengths. Let them broadcast their capabilities. You must be more subtle, more strategic, more sophisticated in your approach. For in the dance of power, the partner who appears to follow while actually leading is the one who controls the movement. This is how lasting advantage is built, not through the obvious display of power, but through the strategic use of perceived weakness. Not through being feared for your visible strength, but through being underestimated while building real power. Not through what others know about your capabilities, but through what they falsely believe about your limitations. The highest form of power is not in winning openly, but in achieving victory so subtle that others believe they chose their own defeat. When they think it was their idea, when they believe they made the decision independently, when they take ownership of the very outcome you orchestrated. This is the apex of strategic manipulation. For in the game of power, the most complete victory is the one that remains invisible. Consider this fundamental truth. People resist external control, but embrace their own decisions. They fight against obvious manipulation but welcome subtle guidance. They reject forceful direction but accept carefully architected choices. This is why the master of power doesn't push, they position. They don't command. They create contexts where the desired choice becomes the natural choice. Most people fail in this art because they hunger for recognition. They need others to know they've won. They want credit for their victories. This is the behavior of amateurs. The true practitioner of power understands that visible victory creates resistance, while invisible victory creates willing participation. Watch how the masters of this art operate. They don't force decisions. They shape the environment in which decisions are made. They don't demand compliance. They create circumstances where compliance appears to be the best available option. They understand that the most effective control is the kind that feels like freedom to those being controlled. Here's a crucial principle. When people believe an idea is their own, they will fight to achieve it. When they think a decision comes from their own analysis, they will defend it against opposition. When they feel ownership of a direction, they will invest their energy in its success. The art lies in making your preferred outcome feel like their personal discovery. The skilled practitioner knows that invisible victory takes many forms. Sometimes it's planting seeds of ideas that others nurture to fruition. Sometimes it's creating conditions where your desired outcome becomes the logical conclusion. Sometimes it's simply positioning choices so that the preferred option appears most attractive. The power lies in making your influence unfelt while its effects remain undeniable. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to guide without appearing. To lead, ask questions that naturally lead to your preferred conclusions. Second, create environments where your desired outcomes appear to arise organically from circumstances. Third, develop the patience to let others take credit for ideas you carefully planted. But here's the subtle part. Your influence must remain truly invisible. The moment others suspect they're being guided, the spell is broken. The most effective manipulation is one where your role is never questioned because it's never noticed. Your hand should be felt so lightly that its presence is never suspected. Remember this: every victory that appears to belong to others is a foundation stone in your edifice of power. The wise leader doesn't claim these victories, they accumulate them silently, building influence through a series of outcomes that others believe they chose themselves. They understand that power grows best in the shade of others' perceived autonomy. Learn to architect victory without leaving fingerprints. When others succeed in ways that serve your objectives, let them believe it was entirely their achievement. When your preferred outcomes materialize through others' actions, let them take full ownership. When your influence bears fruit, let others harvest what you have planted. Consider how the truly powerful achieve their ends. They don't triumph, they orchestrate. They don't win, they arrange for winning to happen. They understand that the difference between visible and invisible victory is the difference between temporary compliance and willing participation. This principle applies beyond obvious power plays. Even in collaborative environments, the ability to achieve outcomes without being seen as their source creates advantages. When others believe they're acting independently while advancing your objectives, you gain both the result you desire and the benefit of their genuine commitment to it. The final lesson is this: don't seek credit, seek results. Don't pursue recognition, pursue effectiveness. Don't strive for acknowledged victories, strive for actual outcomes. For in the game of power, the most complete success is the one that appears to have happened naturally, inevitably, without your visible involvement. Your task is not to win visibly, but to succeed invisibly, not to dominate obviously, but to influence imperceptibly, not to command openly, but to guide unseen. This is how lasting power is built, not through the visible exercise of control, but through the invisible architecture of choice. Let others claim victories. Let them take credit for successes. Let them believe in their own autonomy. You must be more subtle, more strategic, more sophisticated in your approach. For in the exercise of power, the hand that is never seen is the one that guides most effectively. This is how real influence is built, not through the declaration of victory, but through the careful accumulation of outcomes that serve your purposes while appearing to serve others' choices. Not through visible control, but through invisible guidance. Not through what others know you've achieved, but through what they believe they've achieved themselves. Let us end with the most fundamental truth of power. It is never granted, only claimed. Those who wait to be given power will wait forever. Those who ask permission to lead will never truly lead. The universe rewards not the deserving, but the daring. In the game of power, hesitation is defeat, and bold action, properly calculated, is the only path to victory. Consider this eternal truth. Power abhors a vacuum. Every moment of hesitation, every instance of doubt, every pause for permission, is a space that someone else will fill. Nature has no patience for those who wait their turn. The world belongs to those who move first, who act decisively, who seize what others merely contemplate. Most people fail in their pursuit of power because they believe in fairness in waiting, their turn in being granted what they deserve. This is the thinking of servants, not masters. The true practitioner of power understands that worthiness is irrelevant. Only action matters. The crown belongs not to the most deserving, but to the one bold enough to take it and strong enough to keep it. Watch how the masters of power operate. They don't wait for opportunities, they create them. They don't ask for authority, they assume it. They don't hope for power, they take actions that make them powerful. They understand that power is not a gift to be received, but a territory to be conquered. Here's a crucial principle. Power responds to action, not intention. Your readiness, your worthiness, your preparation mean nothing until translated into movement. The universe doesn't care about your potential. It responds only to your actions. The art lies not in being worthy of power, but in being bold enough to claim it. The skilled practitioner knows that taking power requires many forms of action. Sometimes it's stepping into leadership when others hesitate. Sometimes it's creating situations that demand your specific capabilities. Sometimes it's simply being the first to act while others are still considering their options. The power lies in understanding which form of action each situation requires. Master these specific techniques. First, learn to recognize power vacuums, situations where leadership or direction is lacking. Second, develop the ability to act decisively while others are still analyzing. Third, build the capability to sustain your position once taken, for taking power is only the beginning. Keeping it is the true test. But here's the subtle part. Bold action must be calculated action. Reckless moves invite destruction. The most effective taking of power appears inevitable in retrospect, as if the universe itself demanded your action. Your boldness should seem like necessity after the fact. Remember this, every moment of hesitation is a missed opportunity that someone else will seize. The wise leader doesn't wait for perfect conditions. They create favorable conditions through action. They understand that power goes not to those who can handle it best, but to those who dare to take it first. Learn to recognize the moments that demand action. When others are paralyzed by uncertainty, when traditional authorities falter, when existing structures show weakness, these are the moments when bold action can rewrite the rules of the game. These are the times when power is most ready to be taken. Consider how the truly powerful rise. They don't gradually accumulate authority. They take decisive actions that make their authority inevitable. They don't slowly gather influence. They create situations where their influence becomes necessary. They understand that power is not earned through patience, but seized through decisive action. This principle applies beyond obvious power moves. Even in subtle situations, the willingness to act while others wait creates advantage. When others seek consensus, the one who moves first often defines the terms of discussion. When others analyze, the one who acts first often creates the framework others must work within. The final lesson is this: don't wait for power to be given. Take it. Don't ask for permission to lead. Create situations that demand your leadership. Don't hope for recognition. Take actions that make you indispensable. For in the game of power, the most dangerous person is not the most qualified, but the most willing to act. Your task is not to deserve power, but to seize it, not to wait for recognition, but to create circumstances that demand your prominence, not to hope for authority, but to take actions that make your authority inevitable. Let others wait for their turn. Let them hope for fairness. Let them believe in gradual progression. You must be bolder, more decisive, more willing to seize the moment, for in the realm of power, the future belongs not to the worthy, but to the bold, not to the deserving, but to the daring, not to those who wait, but to those who act. This is how lasting power is built, not through patience, but through decisive action, not through waiting, but through seizing, not through being granted authority, but through taking it and proving through your actions that you were right to do so.